forecast that shows still further improvement in our state's finances. Minnesota's progress has been made possible in large part by our state's strong and still growing economy, which has added 255,400 new jobs since January 2011, and due to our sound fiscal management. Our progress stands in stark contrast to the fiscal problems confronting many other states. The National Association of State Budget Officers reports that 24 states now have fiscal 2017 general fund revenues coming in below their projections. This is the highest number of states expecting revenue shortfalls since 2010. And nearly half of all states are projected to have budget shortfalls for fiscal year 2018. The Minnesota Departments of Revenue and Management and Budget will now reprice my previous budget proposals based upon this forecast. They expect to complete this work by the end of next week. Accordingly, I will not release any supplemental budget proposals until the week of March 13th. However, I want to issue a strong note of caution to the legislature. The section, quote, significant risks with this forecast is not factored into the actual numbers of the forecast. It lists U.S. policy uncertainty, international trade, inflation, long, slow growth expansion, and the fact that 28 months remain until the end of fiscal years 2018 and 19. I would add that there are 52 months until the end of the fiscal 2021 biennium. The effects of those uncertainties are presently unmeasurable. However, their potentials for seriously negative impacts on our state's economy and fiscal well-being are enormous. At the National Governors Association conference last weekend, the meetings with President Trump, with other key administration officials, and among my fellow governors were characterized by unprecedented degrees of uncertainty, anxiety, and confusion. In those meetings and in other recent pronouncements, administration officials offered only generalities about health care reform, trade policies, and other crucial matters. And they regularly contradicted one another when describing the details. I note that just yesterday, the director of OMB raised the specter of cuts in Social Security and Medicare, only to be immediately rebutted by the president's press secretary. Similarly, despite repeated questioning by governors of both parties, administration officials were unable or unwilling, but I think it was unable, to provide details about their intended changes to Medicaid. All of which means that the uncertainties surrounding this budget forecast demand extreme caution and restraint from my administration, the legislature, and various affected interest groups. We have worked hard to achieve these budget surpluses. They must be preserved. I'd like to respond to questions on this subject.
Talking about the caution and the need to not be too eager, you view tax cuts and spending similar there? That the question is just how much money is on the bottom line, or do you think one of those poses a bigger risk than another?
It's on the bottom line, but I think you've got to look especially at the tails. You know, the 2021 surplus grew significantly, and that will ease the room for both tax and spending cuts, but particularly tax cuts, which, as you know, most of them don't take effect until 1 year in the 18-19 biennium and then 2 years of the next biennium, so you could almost double the costs of many of them in the biennium, the outline biennium. So I think that's where they have to be particularly careful, but that was true before, and this forecast provides more flexibility for those decisions.
Some money on the bottom line to prepare for any unforeseen costs that may be passed down by the federal government?
You know, it's going to be hard to quantify what that amount should be. And of course, we have a budgeted reserve and cash flow account of $2 billion. But you know, we'll see. It may be that before the end of this legislative session, we'll get a better idea from Washington. We may get in the next couple of weeks the president and was pressing Secretary Price to be more definite about when they would be making their proposals on Medicaid and other health care changes. And the Secretary said the end of March, and the President cut that in half. So we'll see when it actually occurs. And of course, then the Congress has to act as well. But we may have a better idea by the time we had to finalize the state's budget in May, what some of those impacts are going to be. But others of them are going to be really unforeseeable because the Congress is going to have to act, and that's what the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, said their goal was to have a tax bill passed by the Congress by the August recess. So that's, and for the Congress, that's a fast timetable. So we'll just have to see. But, you know, we do need to protect against a downturn. I think the odds are in the 52 weeks between now and the end of fiscal 2021, we're going to have some economic disruptions nationally and internationally that are not factored into this forecast. And what those are and how consequential those are is I can't predict, but I think it's very likely we'll see them. You look at the economic forecast here, it assumes a consistent level of economic growth nationally, and that applies to Minnesota, and I think that's very optimistic myself.
The work ahead, it seems like the hard work is now ahead, and so far session has been kind of a honeymoon. You're fresh off another bipartisan bill signing. Does it all turn here?
Well, it firms up here. You know, the legislature's properly been waiting for this forecast to start setting their budget targets and the like, so it gets more real, and the numbers don't have the same latitude that the language in policy bills might have. So, you know, it now is going to come down to, we have about 3 months left. It's going to come down to, you know, really hard look at all these, because even with these surpluses, I think Representative Dayton said the tax cut proposals are $6 to $7 billion. So, you know, that obviously exceeds greatly, and there are other, you know, appetites as well. So it's going to take a lot of pruning and a lot of compressing.
Uncertainty you talked about, can we expect to see more budget changes, budget proposal changes?
No, I haven't given that enough thought. I've had a couple of requests. Hennepin County Medical Center, for example, is in dire financial straits, and that's something I think is very important, not only to this metro region, but the entire state. Is, you know, one of our level 1 health facilities and does a phenomenal job. So that kind of thing needs consideration that wasn't on the table before. But I'm not going to say anything until I've had a chance to reprice and also talk with commissioners and staff.
Down the road, the rest of the legislative session, would you expect, because of the changes in Washington, would you expect to keep having to update your budget proposal?
It depends on the changes in Washington. And again, those are really unforeseeable at this point. They don't know themselves. I mean, and when they take effect, you know, now they talk about the Affordable Care Act changes taking effect in calendar year 2020. Well, obviously that won't affect it directly to the next biennium. It's just too soon to say.
Republicans are already pointing out that your initial budget increased the budget by about 10%. Is that considered cautious?
Well, my budget provides for a $1.64 billion surplus in the next biennium and over $2 billion in the final biennium. That's the fiscal management that we've imposed on state government, which have kept revenues apace with spending increases, which are due to healthcare and education primarily. So I'm very proud of what we've established. And we've established the surpluses where previously there were deficits. And, you know, I know I'm not going to get credit from Republicans. That's not their line of work. But after all the carping and harping, I think there ought to be acknowledgement. And the U.S. News report just again says, you know, third best state in the nation. We've been rated consistently highly by various national organizations. We've done a lot of things right. And the reason that they have a surplus to talk about giving back in tax cuts, or for whatever other reason, is because we righted this fiscal state of this ship of this state, and we got it on a trajectory now where we'll continue to have healthy surpluses, and they share a responsibility, the legislature, with me to make sure that continues.
The state's reserve fund now, it's very close to what experts have recommended. Would you be open to a use of that surplus for anything in a budgeted way going forward?
Not the use of it. Commissioner Franz and the ghost of former Commissioner Showalter keep whispering, you know, add to the reserve, and you know that's something I'll consider given the uncertainties ahead. But you know, we'll just have to again get to see. But I don't see using the present reserve for any other purpose.
uncertainty in handling the new administration as changing the budget year, off year, dynamic at the legislature? Do you think you'll come back next year and have to respond more to changes from the federal government?
Very, well, of course, they'll be coming back next year. So, I mean, they'll have that opportunity. Whether we'll need to do something before then, I guess it remains to be seen. I mean, it depends on, when they make their changes and how that affects, for example, the enrollment for 2018 under the Affordable Care Act, if that still exists, I mean, how that's going to impact. I don't foresee that we'll have to have a special session. Our record in obtaining special sessions has not been promising, but I would certainly, like to have anything that needs to be done wait till whenever they come back in next year. But again, I mean, I couldn't get the administration officials who are the decision makers on these matters. I don't think they yet have resolved within themselves how they're going to proceed and what their timetable is going to be and when they're going to take effect. So if they don't know, certainly nobody else does.
There's about a 25% probability that the Trump administration's policies will prove to be a negative on the economy, or do you agree with this sort of 60%?
I haven't heard those percentages. I don't know. What are they saying?
60% they assume the negative.
Do you think they're right?
Sort of like the weather forecast last week, and I don't know. I'll defer to their, they make extremely sophisticated and complex judgments based on all these factors that I don't have the information. So I don't. I'll just defer to whatever they said.
Based on your interactions recently, do you feel like there's a greater or lesser likelihood that the impact is going to be positive or negative?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends on how this plays out. They're talking about a significant tax cut with the idea that it's going to boost economic growth. The Secretary of Treasury said that they're going to get economic growth up to 3% or even a bit higher. That's going to be a very positive impact on the federal budget as well as the state budget. And then, of course, you've got, again, shift the costs of Medicaid to the states, to all the states, and impacts on that. I mean, it's a balance. Trade, the agriculture industry and communities are very concerned about the fossil trade war and that like. Target Corporation representatives were at the NGA, and they're very concerned, along with Best Buy and others, about the possible import tax. I mean, there's so many of these things that are just, being talked about now, but nobody knows what they're going to be. Obviously, the administration intends that they're going to have positive effects, but we'll see what happens. I can't predict.
Thank you.
Did anybody talk about sound insulation when this thing was being? That's democracy, though. All right, thank you.